the world, key workers are being sacked for not following COVID guidelines, even though we are increasingly learning that lockdowns, masks, and vaccines might need more inquiry to properly understand them. Hello there, you 5.9 million awakening wonders. Thank you for joining me on this voyage towards truth. I know there is a great light within you. I know you have suffered in your life. I know that life includes deep pain and disappointment. But I truly believe that in spite of how difficult things are, that together we can change things. Not because we're perfect, certainly not because any individual is perfect, but because collectively we can come together with new systems, new rules, and new values that might be a bit bloody fairer. We're going to talk to you today about a story in Australia where teachers are getting their pay cut because they're not abiding by certain measures, suggestions and requirements, even though those very same may not be scientifically underwritten in the way we first assumed, or not assumed, were told. We were told. If you ain't subscribed yet, subscribe right now. We're tantalisingly close to having 6 million subscribers, and a little tubby boy in Grays, Essex, called Russell Brand, licking a lollipop, waiting on a wall on a Saturday, might feel good about himself, even though he doesn't exist anymore. So can we appease a child's dreams? No, there's no point. Let's focus on the future. But do turn on the notification bell, because that will help an adult man called Russell Brand ensure that his videos are watched in spite of an algorithm that might be corruptio, is the word I sometimes use. Let's get into this story right away, because certainly something strange is happening in Australia. Australians, what's going on in your country? What are you trying to prove?
Hundreds of Queensland teachers will have their pay cut as punishment for not getting vaccinated.
Good. Don't get vaccinated, get your pay cut. Vaccines stops the spread, stops COVID. You're not going to get a vaccine, going to have your pay cut. Simples.
While the teachers are now allowed back in the classroom.
Don't let them back in the classroom. Make them stand on the edge of it. Make them teach through a window. Right, 2 + 2, what's that? Vaccine.
In the last 48 hours, hundreds of teachers have received a dressing down and a pay cut.
Right, first, here's your dressing down. Look at you. You're a disgrace to Australia, and that ain't done easily. And secondly, we're cutting your fucking pay, mate. Do you remember the beginning of a pandemic when it was like, key workers, nurses, doctors, teachers, people making deliveries, postal workers, Deliveroo, everyone that's helping, low-paid workers. Oh my God, we've realised now these people are vital and important to the functioning of a society. Now what's going on? Right, pay cut. You're going to get such a bloody dressing down. Call this a delivery? Fuck off. Call this teaching? Shut up. Call this a vaccine? This is a vaccine.
Michael J. Crocodile Dundee.
Described in a letter from the Education Department as a reduction in remuneration.
George Carlin will be proud of that use of bureaucratic language. Reduction in remuneration. Mate, we're giving you a dressing down and we're nicking your wages.
For a period of 18 weeks.
Teachers are absolutely devastated. They're in fear because they've been penalised more than once.
It's pronounced penalised. That's another docking.
So they've been penalised with, they went on leave without pay.
The Education Department letter slamming their conduct. It is important that you are aware of the seriousness with which the department views your inappropriate behaviour and failure to comply with the direction.
That's bureaucratic bullying, isn't it? It's like we're very disappointed in you. We've told you what to do. Well, let's just hope that everything you're suggesting is undergirded with indefatigable science. Otherwise, what you're doing is needlessly bullying people. And let's hope that the Australian government isn't in receipt of income from pharmaceutical companies that might bias the way they legislate and regulate the use of certain medications. And let's hope that the evidence around lockdown ain't being queried. And let's hope that natural immunity and vitamin D and things that you were talking about at the beginning of this pandemic aren't now being brought to the forefront.
These are people who were on the front line for years working, and now all of a sudden this is how they've been treated. So it's just not good enough.
Do you sometimes think there's like a global squeeze on ordinary people, whether it's through like price hikes, imposition of certain medications, suggestions of like social credit scoring? Ordinary people are somehow being primed and prepped for some new way of thinking. I don't want to get into conspiracy stuff. Honestly, I don't want to, because when you say things that are not underwritten by proper research and facts, it makes me look silly and it makes makes you guys look silly. But don't you feel like there are so many measures that appear to be pressurising ordinary people, whether that's culturally, socially, but I guess most of all, economically and politically, till we're in this sort of state of bewilderment? This is what I sometimes think. Anthropologically, we're not that much different than we would have been like 10,000 years ago at the early advent of agriculture, where we're still sort of tribal people, hunter-gatherers, used to only knowing about 30 to 100 people, living simple lives in harmony with nature. Not to suggest there wouldn't be a degree of brutality about that way of life. I sometimes feel we've come too far from who we really are. Too many screens, too many distractions, too many bad ideas, everything a commercial transaction, everything an imposition of authority. There is a yearning to be free within human beings that has to be heard and listened to. So whoever you are and wherever you are in the world, I think you can learn something from this situation in Australia, because it shows how the government are regulating it and how the pharmaceutical industry is able to influence that regulation. Is this fair? Is it just? And is it for the benefit of ordinary people? Or are there other interests that benefit? Firstly, I should tell you, the pharmaceutical industry donates millions to both Australian political parties. Why would that be? Why? We just love political parties so much. We're aficionados. Well, you don't expect any influence or sway when it comes to regulations or big decisions. Nah, we just donate that money for a little love of politics. We're like sports fans, really. How come it's both parties then? Because we love politics so much. We want both parties to win. Like, you know, when you're watching like a football match and just think, I really love the red team. I really love the blue team. Well, don't you normally pick a team because they're in line with your ideology? Our ideology is we're going to get what we fucking want. Australia's lockdowns were some of the harshest in the world. In February, researchers from Johns Hopkins University released a study saying lockdowns prevented just 0.2% of deaths in comparison with simply trusting people to do the right thing. So all of these draconian measures, all of these impositions on civil liberties has been about a 0.2% decrease in fatality. I don't think so, do you? If we could just make 0.2% of a difference, do you really think that's what's going on? Again, conspiracy theories, I don't want to entertain them. But if you can look at evidence and it suggests that like governments benefit from being able to impose more regulation, corporations benefit from being able to glean more profit, big tech benefits because they've got access to more data, secret services benefit because they're now able to feed governments more data about individuals, which in itself leads to further control. If the most powerful interests in the world benefit from a situation, then I suppose you have to analyse the way that situation is being handled or remedied if most people consider it to be a problem. In August, The Telegraph reported that in the UK, the effects of lockdown may now be killing more people than are dying of COVID. In the United States, a study in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that 80% of COVID-19 patients were vitamin D deficient, suggesting, I suppose, that if you have sufficient vitamin D, you will have a better chance of fighting COVID. Thing is, to get sufficient vitamin D, you're going to have to go outside. So we mustn't take any measures that prevent people from going outside. Excuse me, I've got to take this call. You're not going to let anyone go outside. Thanks for that. Last week, the Irish Times reported that insufficient vitamin D was linked to a greater than 4-fold increase in risk of death among COVID-19 patients. I've heard people say that so many of the decisions that were made globally had a negative impact that it's difficult to imagine that it was a coincidence. It almost feels coordinated. It's almost like in every instance, the worst thing done. Something like locking people down and not giving them access to vitamin D when vitamin D is clearly vital in fighting off the disease seems beyond clumsy. In January, the CDC released data from New York and California which demonstrated natural immunity was 2.8 times as effective in preventing hospitalization and 3.3 to 4.7 times as effective in preventing COVID infection compared with vaccination. Do you sometimes feel like the suggestions and recommendations benefit the state and their ability to control and pharmaceutical companies in their ability to make profit? Now, I don't want to be reductive and simplistic. I don't know what's best for you. I don't know what background you've got. I don't know what research you've got access to. But what I do know is when a situation is beneficial to pharmaceutical companies and then it's mandated, there are questions there. You're certainly not in a situation where you can start docking teachers' wages. You're certainly not in a situation where you can start sacking nurses and doctors. It certainly seems rather hypocritical that these key workers were heralded as the great saviours during the pandemic when it was convenient and then dispatched when it was equally convenient to do so. Something doesn't seem right to me. I'm not saying that there's a conspiracy. I'm not saying that. I don't want to feed read into that kind of stuff. What I am saying is it's very important that we have the ability to calculate truth based on evidence that's in front of us. In March 2021, Krispy Kreme offered a free donut to anyone vaccinated, while New Yorkers were offered free Shake Shack fries for getting vaccinated. A CDC study found that 78% of people hospitalised for COVID were overweight or obese. Like, if nearly 80% of people that are getting a disease and are being hospitalised for that disease are suffering from obesity, don't give people cakes and shakes and fries and snacks in order to get them vaccinated, because it's going to make the situation worse, isn't it? I mean, what was the science that was at play there? We're meant to be following the science. Right, there's a massive outbreak of herpes. Tell everybody that dips their dick into this bucket in the street that they can get a free anti-herpes tablet. Have you checked there's no herpes in that bucket? What? Oh, no, we didn't check the bucket. Where'd you get that bucket off? Ron Jeremy, Jeffrey Epstein, they were just a bunch of guys hanging around playing with it. In the US, thousands of unvaccinated New York City school employees were placed on unpaid leave. Vaccinated or not, in the US, thousands of educators were laid off due to COVID-19. It's like we've got no principles as a culture. I don't mean also, literally, no school principles. They've all been laid off. But also no principles, no ethics, no morality. What are our guiding principles? What are the coordinates? What is the North Star of our culture? It's this: make money and facilitate state power. Don't bust that relationship. Allow that carousel to keep on turning. Allow Congress people to own stocks and shares. Allow big companies to lobby government. Allow tax breaks for the richest interests in the world. Allow ordinary people to be exploited. Create media conditions where ordinary people are arguing about issues that, while are important, are not as important as where centralized power is in its dominion and our ability to impact it. That seems to be what's happening. What are our values as a culture? We're told we're meant to value firefighters, teachers, doctors, nurses. These are the people that hold our culture together. The police force, the military, men and women that are willing to sacrifice themselves for a greater good. We were told teachers were doing vital work during the pandemic. All right, but if they're not vaccinated, then we're probably going to lay them off. Also, we're going to lay them off if they are vaccinated. Wow, is there any way that ordinary people can win? We're making sure that their fucking well isn't. Nurses, though. Surely no one's going to treat nurses bad. Think of all the good encounters you've had with nurses, visiting a dying loved one in a hospital. Good old nurses. Surely they're safe. Thousands of nurses were fired or suspended for not getting a COVID shot, while due to shortages, healthcare workers who were tested positive for the coronavirus were asked to return to work. So nurses who didn't get a shot that doesn't prevent spread or infection were fired, while healthcare workers who had coronavirus were asked to return to work. Hold on, what the fuck is this? Is this some sort of proposition from Wittgenstein? Is this a koan? Is this something that I have to try to understand by becoming a cosmic mind? You sacked people for not getting the shot. You got people back to work who had the vaccine that the shot's supposed to prevent. How does that work? New York State's COVID-19 vaccine mandate alone led to about 34,000 health workers losing jobs or being placed on leave. 34,000 is not a small number of people. That's a decent-sized stadium full of people. That's in New York alone. Imagine the number of people that were not working because of something that in retrospect doesn't look to be grounded in decent science. In California, state officials attempted to address the staffing shortages by allowing vaccinated asymptomatic healthcare workers who have tested positive for the coronavirus to return to work immediately. Some healthcare workers said it was hypocritical of the state to ask coronavirus positive staffers to report for duty after instituting a vaccine mandate that cost some workers their jobs. It doesn't make sense, does it? We're trying to make videos for you that you can show to people that use terms like COVIDiot, conspiracy theorist, although I'm noticing a lot less of it nowadays. Are you? Because the data is starting to come in. I suppose we shouldn't assume mendacity when stupidity would do. Perhaps these people are just extremely stupid. And if that's the case, we should still get rid of them anyway. Experts say that about 20% of all health workers have quit since the onset of COVID. And leaders of several nursing unions say they've lost moderate numbers of members over the past 2 years. Hospital administrators and lobbyists, meanwhile, claim they cannot substantially increase staffing levels because of a severe shortage of nurses willing to take their jobs. This is another crisis we're describing, along with the cost of living crisis that I know that all too many of you are aware of. A crisis in healthcare workers is being unnecessarily induced by decisions that don't appear to make sense. I'm having trouble joining all the dots, particularly using the information we're being given by the mainstream media. In reality, those forces have been at play for years, perhaps decades. As the healthcare industry in the US moves stridently towards a profit-first model, workers have felt the effects of staffing levels being trimmed to the bone while hospitals regularly run at nearly full capacity, and many workers have made the decision to leave. I need you to explain something to me. During this crisis, the mainstream media continually blamed unvaccinated people.
Oh, you can't shame them. You can't call them stupid. You can't call them silly. Yes, they are.
Where are the mainstream media stories to tell us that 20% of healthcare workers are resigning, that 34,000 healthcare workers lost their jobs in New York? Where are these stories? Why were they so obsessed in telling us about COVIDiots and the unvaccinated when it seems that private healthcare for-profit hospital models were to blame for a great deal of this, that an ideology that was in place even before COVID was exacerbated, that they exploited a crisis, that something that was a problem for very many of us was seen as an opportunity by profiteering big pharma and medical companies? And why do the mainstream media collude in those narratives? Where are the alternative messages? Why are these stories not getting out there? I'm not even saying that we're definitely right. How can I? I'm saying this conversation isn't taking place. Why not? So there you are. All over the world, in the United States of America, I know for sure in my country, and now we know in Australia, key workers, service workers, people that ought to be regarded as the backbone of their country, people that do jobs that are based on helping other people, whether that's in healthcare or in education, people that should be prized, treasured and cherished, are being dispatched and ill-treated based on information that no longer seems viable. It seems to me that ordinary people from across the class spectrum are being penalised and persecuted in order to achieve goals that I don't fully understand. I know that profit is part of it, I know that power is part of it, but it's too complex for me to hold in my head. Why don't you let me know in the comments below what you think's happening? Let me know in the comments below if you think we should have a voice to be able to address what seems to me to be a type of corruption or ineptitude. Whatever it is, I feel that it has to stop. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think. What you think is so much more important. Your collective consciousness is what fuels our channel. If you don't subscribe yet, subscribe right now and turn on the notification bell. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these. They're both fantastic videos. It's important we educate ourselves together because we're not going to get this information anywhere else. Remember, give us a little like, sign up to the mailing list, particularly if you want to come and see me live in America. I could be coming there very soon. More important than any of that, please stay free.